Hi, this is Michael Monahan, a.k.a. Dr. Goulfinger, and you're listening to The Graveyard Show.
Welcome to the Graveyard.
And you are listening to the Graveyard Show podcast, the Tombstone edition. I am your caretaker, and the graveyard is open. Come on inside, folks. It's been a hot one this summer, and I'm sure my windy graveyard is providing some comfort for you. Let's continue our conversation about horror hosts, as I will be presenting my second interview with Michael Monahan, a.k.a. Dr. Goulfinger, who you heard at the top of the show. This was actually the third time that he appeared on my program back in 2009-2010. Now, if you missed his first two interviews that I pieced together like Dr. Frankenstein in my last show, it's one episode back. So you can take a listen to that. We talked horror hosts, and Michael's considered the leading authority in horror host history, which is not just important to the horror genre as a whole, it's also a very important part of American television history as well. And culturally as well. So unlike the previous episode where we talked about horror hosts in general, this particular interview with Michael, we hone in on one horror host in particular, and her name was Vampira, otherwise known as Maila Nurmi. She was the very first horror host. She's ground zero, folks, for all horror hosts. And Michael just brings just tons of information about her life and her career. And if you're a fan of Vampira, well, you're in the right place. It's also interesting her connection with James Dean as well. Don't ask me who James Dean is. If you ask me who James Dean is, you need to leave now. Sorry. There's just certain things that you need to know going into this. So anyway, yeah, sorry. You have to have a general knowledge of things sometimes to hear my interviews. And also, speaking of Vampira, my interview with Jason Hignite, who was the event coordinator for the Vampira Tribute, is also online as well. You can find that. It's, I think, number 6 or something in the episodes, if you want to go back and hear about the Vampira Tribute. Huge success, and just a great event that you should know about if you're a fan of horror and you're just learning things. Okay, let's just get right to it. Let's come on inside my caretaker quarters, where the fire is roaring. Yes, I know it's the height of summer, but it does get cold here inside the graveyard. So you'll thank me later. The fireplace is going, and if you like to pop some popcorn the old-fashioned way, please be my guest. Just make sure you make enough for everyone. Okay, let me turn on my state-of-the-art tube TV here, because that is going to get us where we need to go. The time, March 11th, 2010. The place, Graveyard Show podcast number 60. Wow, that's getting close to the end of the original run. All right, let me adjust the rabbit ears, and let's see. All right, I've been getting really good at this lately since I've been using a lot of it, so we should be getting there quite quickly. And who better to bring in to talk about Vampira than friend of the program, horror host and horror host aficionado, one of the experts on horror hosts, talking about, of course, Dr. Goulfinger himself, Michael Monahan, friend of the program. He was here last year. He's back again. Michael, thank you for coming back to the graveyard.
Oh, hey, well, thanks very much for the invite. I really enjoyed our last talk.
As did I. It was awesome, and that's why after we spoke last time, I couldn't wait to get you back on the program, and how appropriate it is to have you back right now as we're looking at the Vampira Tribute at the end of the month coming up March 26th, 27th, and 28th in Indianapolis, Indiana. You will be there, which we will get into in just a little bit. But first, because you are such an authority on horror hosts, let's talk about Vampira. Let's talk about Maila Nurmi, because
Sure.
I'm sure there are some people out there who don't even know who Vampira is. So let's talk about, before we get into the character of Vampira. Let's talk about Maila Nurmi pre-Vampira. What can you tell us about the woman?
Well, I think one of the important things to sort of keep in mind about Maila was that she was an artist throughout her entire life, and that's really the key to everything that she did, including Vampira. And part of the power, the iconic power of Vampira, is purely a matter of design, and it takes an artist to do that, and that's really where a lot of that comes from. But prior to that, in talking with Maila for the American Scary Film, some of her happiest memories were growing up with fashion and glamour magazines from Hollywood and learning about design and glamour from out of these magazines, and those were some of her earliest inspirations for the path that she eventually took. And during World War II, during that period, she was in New York, and was saying that essentially continuing her education there as a cigarette girl, which was a job she absolutely adored. She said, as she put it, I never had finishing school, but I was a cigarette girl, and in a club with all these very, very sophisticated people, and so I was learning from them.
And really quickly, because I know there's somebody out there going, what the hell is a cigarette girl? And really quickly, it was a girl who walked around. She had the box of cigarettes, the tray, and she'd walk around, and they'd have all the different brands of cigarettes, and when you were at the club, you would buy them from the cigarette girl before, of course, vending machines, and I think they were even around even after vending machines. But that's what a cigarette girl is. I'm sorry, Michael. I just want
yeah, I'm sure that everyone's preferred vending machine were women like Maila Nurmi.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's kind of where she began to build her interest in culture, was through that type of job. And I think one of the most startling things that she told us, but something that just says so much about her personality that I loved, was that during World War II, as women began to move into the workplace to fill positions that were had been filled by men who were now off to war traditionally, she had a job as she put it, New York's first bellhop. I'm not sure, there's no way to prove if she was the first, but I'm sure she was among the first wave of New York bellhops at hotels. And she told us about meeting Eleanor Roosevelt at one of these hotels. She had come in with one of her sons. Maila had been called up to the front desk to carry their bags, and she took the boy's bags, and he immediately grabbed it back from her because it was just so odd for him to see a woman carrying his bag. And as Maila put it, Eleanor just sort of reared back up and said, "Let the woman do her job." Yeah, and that just so impressed Maila. It was a memory she carried with her throughout her life, and I just can't help but feel it was a defining moment. That there was
wow,
the comment for her life. Let the woman do her job.
Wow. Certainly, when you speak of first ladies, Eleanor Roosevelt is certainly one of the first ladies. Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Maila had a lifelong love for that woman. She talked about hearing later radio speeches from her, and then just what a wonderful, wonderful hero that Roosevelt was for her. Yeah. And again, I think that ties into Maila's own personality. Of course, that would be the type of dynamic woman that Maila would admire. Not a shrinking violet in any sense of the word, but someone very powerful, and who defined themselves and defined the things around them. And Maila carried that spark with her. It makes plenty of sense that she would wind up in Hollywood, and it's just sort of one of those tragic little twists of fate that she really didn't earn more success there after her stint as Vampira.
Yeah.
Because it seemed like a really strong foundation to build off of, but of course there was a real dark side to that, and she felt that the station had blacklisted her, not politically, but within show business, and made it very difficult for her to find work afterward.
Yeah. Now, there are a couple of names when I was doing some research on Vampira or Maila. There are a couple of names that came up with her, and I'm curious if you know anything about this. James Dean.
Oh, wow. Yeah. The way she tells it, she had, Vampira had just hit big in Los Angeles, huge. And, within 3 weeks of the program being on the air, she was in Life magazine, and so the station was getting national attention for Vampira. And, basically at that point, people around her were saying, "World's your oyster. Who do you want to meet?" And they were at some sort of premiere or something, and I can't remember what the film was, but James Dean was in attendance, and just something about him caught her eye. She said, "I want to meet him." And
as did every other woman of the time period.
And later she had the opportunity, and they just hit it off amazingly well. The way she put it is, we were both aliens from another planet.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't see ourselves, really connecting with the world around them, and so they had a really strong bond as eccentrics.
Yeah.
And she said, "Oh, we acted like teenagers. We ran around, we pulled pranks. We just, Jimmy would be playing bongos,
mm-hmm.
and Maila would do bop dancing to it, which is something you later see her doing in a film called The Beatniks.
Uh-huh.
So it's a real throwback to a very specific sort of period in her life.
Yeah.
And and that was.
Were they romantic at all, or was it just strictly a friendship?
I think it sounds like it was strictly platonic, but a very very strong bond. There are unusual circumstances with Maila surrounding Dean's death. She had just sent him a postcard from a photo shoot that she had done at a graveyard in her Vampira gear, and it sent him a postcard that said, "Wish you were here."
Oh, wow.
That arrived after he had left on his driving trip.
Oh, wow.
And because of that and a few other sort of spooky circumstances, people started making a connection between her and Dean, suggesting that she had worked some sort of black magic on him and was responsible. I mean, but just typical tabloid stuff.
Sure.
Nothing anyone took seriously. But
sure.
But it's just that was the sort of connection people were making.
It's interesting that they would look at that and not, which I grew up knowing, was the commercial that he did
with Gig Young,
where he said, "Be careful driving out there because the life you save could be mine."
Could be mine.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That was the California.
Was it the
whatever that was? Yeah. With Gig Young talking to him on the set of Giant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's that to me. That's like, watching the Belushi SNL piece where he's talking about, how he's everybody thought he was going to be the first one.
Everyone went.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And he was, and it's just moments like that where it's like, it just gives you chills.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they don't call it irony for nothing.
Yeah, I'm telling. Yeah, it's crazy. Did you ever hear anything about Mae West firing Maila from a show, like a Broadway show?
Oh gosh. Oh, what was that? The name of the program, the show itself is right on the tip of my tongue.
I think it was the play was called Catherine the Great, or Catherine Was Great, but she did a show called Spook Scandals.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
So what happened?
Well, I think the situation there was just that, if I'm remembering this correctly, that Maila just stood out a little bit too much. Was distracting people from the star. So it was one of those situations. A little too much vavoom from Maila, and it took a little of the spotlight away from May.
So she had her booted.
So that's what that was about. Yeah.
Wow. And then I read somewhere that that Maila also was a model for Man Ray.
Yeah. Oh, she was a pinup cheesecake model for a lot of her early period in Hollywood before she caught traction with showbiz. Yeah, so she was doing that fairly regularly,
so,
and an artist model besides.
Yeah, so I mean, it is pretty incredible. I mean, forgetting the Dean thing, which was after Vampira or during Vampira. Yeah. I mean, she certainly was getting some sort of attention from pretty big names, whether good or bad, leading into it.
Yeah, and she said she actually the whole Vampira thing developed out of a desire to become an evangelist. She needed $20,000, she said, in order to properly set herself up as an evangelist, and figured, well, this TV thing seems to be pretty big. I can do something there.
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So let's talk about her transition into Vampira. So she needs $20,000 to become an evangelist, right? So
yes, yeah.
Wow. So how does this? That's interesting. So at the time, there were no horror hosts on television. She is credited as the very first horror host on television.
Yeah.
The irony, considering that horror would go on to become, mainly dominated by men, but here is a woman who is the pioneer for horror hosting.
Not only being the first, but creating such a distinctive template for everything that followed. I mean, often the pioneer is not necessarily the one that you remember. It's, someone comes along and polishes that a bit and develops it, and that's where people's attention begins. But she came in with something so fully formed, so dynamic, that it sticks. And people, and this is live television, remember. I mean, except for a few moments from Kinescope, nobody remembers Vampira from television. It's all, Plan 9 from Outer Space and photographic images from that film and another photographs that have come up. So, and she never spoke in Plan 9. So the effect was entirely visual for generations of people. Very, just a very powerful, iconic image that punched through in a big, big way. I'm
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, again, that speaks to the artistic side of her, but at the same time, what she was saying that prior to auditioning for Vampira, that and it was also an aspect of her desire to be an evangelist, is that she saw herself as a monologist. She said, "Oh yeah, I can speak in front of an audience and have them in the palm of my hands," and that was one of the things that made her feel that she was uniquely suited to television, that she could take that really pretty easily. But again, the ironic thing is that most people never heard her speak. It's all photographs and silent images from Plan 9.
So how did this whole Vampira character come to be? I mean, how did she create it? Where did the name come from? Where did this whole, character originate?
Well, the interesting thing there is that a friend of mine who's working on a book on Southern California hosts, a fellow by the name of Jim Fetters, forwarded to me an article that showed that KABC, the station down there, already had some established hosts. Nothing for horror, but for instance, they did have a woman who hosted their romantic films. under the name Voluptua.
Okay.
And so when they decided to do the same thing again, using their mystery and horror, mostly mystery films, really, and hooked up with Maila, it was her husband, Dean Reisner, her then husband, who later went on to write the screenplay for Dirty Harry. He was the one who came up with the name Vampira, and I'm assuming it was a play off of the established Voluptua character. You know, just thinking, oh, you know, what's a gothic Voluptua? Vampira.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Because you never saw her with fangs. I mean, they never really did that whole vampire thing, other than like the dress. But really, even that.
Well, see, all this, you know, it goes back to the Charles Addams character. What we later called Morticia on the Addams Family television show, but who was an unnamed, a nameless character in the original Charles Addams comics. And Maila had gone to this big, swanky costume ball, the Bal Caribe in Los Angeles, and decided to go as that character, that Addams character, and that was sort of a prototype for the Vampira, not fully formed. I mean, she said, you know, she had herself dressed in this sort of, you know, these gothic tatters and with a sort of a light blue makeup on her face to give her a wand kind of quality, and she was basically doing that Charles Addams character. And when Hal Stromberg, the producer over at KABC, saw her and said, "Oh, I want her to host our mystery films," you know, he said, "Do that character that you did at the ball." And her feeling was, no, that's Charles Addams' character. I'm not going to do that, but I can do a variation of that. So she took a lot from Terry and Pirates, the Dragon Lady, and Norma Desmond from Sunset Boulevard. And she also was looking at Bondage magazine, saying, okay, we can do this. And, you know, the whole, you know, so there's a dominatrix quality to Vampira, and some of it is literally built into the look of the character with the cinching of the waists and you know, that type of thing. So she took all of these images of, you know, powerful female images, and sort of filtered them through that Charles Addams kind of gothic, and I think as well some of that New York sophistication. Both, you know, the Addams, you know, cartoons were from the New Yorker. She had spent a lot of developmental years in New York working on that sort of sophistication. And so all of that came together. That's what made Vampira. And again, you know, just to emphasize, you know, all of that built artistically, you know, definitely with a very painterly eye.
And certainly two things that stand. Well, I mean, certainly, you know, her look is certainly a standout. Her waist size, how thin was she?
Gosh, what was it? It was at one time Guinness Book of World Records, and I believe, and I could stand corrected on this, but I believe it was 17 inches. And what she would do is, prior to the broadcast, because it was all live, in the days prior to the broadcast, she would go on a fast. And she also created this, this sort of, she mixed mango powder and cold cream, and would rub that on her stomach, rub that around her waist, and then cinch that up tight with rubber and sleep in that. And
oh my gosh,
that concoction underneath would sort of eat away at her flesh.
Wow. Okay.
So she was really suffering for her art. The way she put it, and that it made sense, because it goes back to the Cheesecake days. She said prior to Vampira that she had already been doing what she called body sculpting. So that was just an extension of something that she had been doing already.
Jeez. The other thing is her scream. I mean, those of us who have seen it, the show would open up, she'd walk out, the camera would track in to her, and then she'd look at the camera and then scream.
Yeah, screaming relaxes me so. Now, can you imagine? Again, let's put ourselves in that place, in that time, early 1950s.
Yeah.
And Vampire, Maila was talking about the other types of television programs that were on the air at the time, and you had the presentations of women on television in sitcoms and family dramas were all the little housewife. And so here comes this woman dressed entirely in black with that impossible wasp-like waist, comes up directly into the camera with a full face, a very glamorous face. She used a real kind of Hollywood glamour makeup on herself, and then shrieks at you. I mean, that had to be nerve-jangling. There was nothing else like that on television. Nobody was literally getting in their audience's faces like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about, Leave It to Beaver days, Nuclear Family,
right.
Mom and Dad wearing,
Doesn't even pre-Leave It to Beaver. You're talking more about programs like the Goldbergs and things like that, the early days of TV.
And it's like, Mom and Dad wearing suit and tie and dresses at home. Very different time period. How did the show not get yanked after the first or second? I mean, how did that not happen? I can't even imagine.
Well, I think that was one of those lucky accidents that something that was so radically different didn't put people off. That they were titillated by it rather than outraged.
Sure.
And also beyond that, you have that opening moment, that scream, and that really is an unsettling introduction. But everything else that she did throughout the show had that sort of quiet sophistication. Mm-hmm. The first few shows, she said, were written by the producer and were not very good. But one of the writers for Bob and Ray had been in Los Angeles and saw the program and basically contacted her, I think through the station, saying, look, you've really got a character there, you just don't have a program, and wrote a spec script for them saying, I really like this character, here's what I think you can do with it. And then he became the writer for the show on a regular basis. So again, you suddenly had a writer with some level of sophistication and humor who was helping to form Vampira. And then Maila was also saying that she would come in and do these things, literally on the fly, that they would have the script on a teleprompter for her. And that in itself also fed into the creation of the character, because the words would be appearing on a roller above the camera, and she would be able to glance up and read the line, and she would say it slowly so that she would have time to then take a pause and read the next line. So it sort of naturally slowed down her presentation, and that fed into that kind of air of quiet sophistication that she had as well.
Wow. It all just kind of comes together in the end, huh?
Yeah. You really see elements coming in from a variety of different people, and in this case as well, technologies that kind of force the character a certain way, that help frame it. So Vampira is definitely a multitude of ingredients that came together in a really unexpected and combustive chemistry.
Now, the show itself did not last very long, right?
Yeah, a little over a year. And basically what happened there is that it was pretty standard in contracts at the time, and probably today, I don't know too much about this, but you would go in with a set rate, and once the program was established, you could renegotiate your contract, and generally that meant you get a raise at that point. You weren't making much the first time, but if things were really successful, then everybody's happy to kind of bump your pay. Mm-hmm. In this particular case, that contract period came around, and instead of just saying, Maila, we're delighted with everything that Vampira has been doing for us, Instead, they said, Maila, we want to own controlling interest in Vampira.
Wow.
So we want you to give it, we want 51%. And, and the money's not going to be that much better.
Okay, then.
So basically she told them to go screw, and they said, okay, you're off the air.
Wow.
And, that was the end of it. She did reappear briefly on another station, I think it was KHJ, for another short run, about 6-7 months after her first. But, by that point she had lost the momentum, I think.
Now, how was it that she didn't get sued by Charles Addams for basically taking Morticia Addams, really?
Well, again, she really, really did change the look considerably. There was, and I think the most important thing that she added that the Morticia of the television series later took was the idea of glamour.
Mm-hmm.
The character in the original Addams is this very just rail thin and grayish woman, and Maila took that sort of gothic idea and then just added this glamour and grace to it, and that really changed the character significantly. And so there was really no connection. And plus, she didn't have a family around her or anything. This was an individual character. So the Addams was definitely an inspiration. But what Maila created was something, wholly other out of that.
So basically, then she borrowed from Addams, and then the TV show borrowed from her. Really, it's kind of like almost come full circle.
If you look at those three elements, if you look at the Addams cartoon, you look at Vampira, you look at Morticia Addams, Carolyn Jones in the Addams Family TV series, Carolyn Jones looks almost exactly like Vampira and does not look like the woman in the Charles Addams strips.
Yeah.
And Maila kind of felt that, the part of the tug of war for control was based on the desire to do an Addams Family series. But the Addams Family series was years and years later. So if there had been any sort of desire to do that at the time, as a project, it took an additional 10 years for them to get it on the air. So I don't know if I completely buy that, but they wanted control of the character at least.
Yeah. So now Vampira's on and off the air within a year. She's the first horror host. Now, how did that inspire other horror hosts in terms of, did word get out through other markets that there was this, woman who's on TV doing these horror shows? How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, basically nothing happened after that. It wasn't. Maila had nothing to do with, she was basically a blip on the radar in 1954. She really was just a local personality that came and went, and except for the fact that Life magazine published photographs, press around the world when she first came on also printed photographs, and she had fan clubs and everything like that. So, but there was nothing else established for her to have any additional context. She was just this personality, this strange, eccentric personality. And when she went off the air, no one rushed in to fill that space because that genre hadn't really been fully created. And it wasn't until the release of the Universal Monster Pictures in 57, 58 that was the defining moment. And people basically started from scratch there. And most of the early female horror hosts have more of a don't share that sort of elegant Vampira quality. So I don't think they were originally inspired by that. It really was Plan 9.
Yeah.
When Plan 9 came out, between that and then photographs existed of Vampira, and people could sort of begin to put two and two together and see that this is what that character looked like in the Ed Wood film, but here's what that character looked like out in the world. There's much more glamorous quality to that. And by that point you also had as other hosts were inspired by characters from the horror films themselves, you did have the female vampire character like Carol Borland and Mark of the Vampire, and things like that they could play off of as well, or even Gloria Holden, Dracula's daughter. So, women had the women's role in the early days of horror hosting, at least, was really significantly limited. But they did have a few other touchstones besides Vampira that they could go to.
So she goes on to be one of the co-stars in, I guess up until recently, was considered the worst movie ever made. From Outer Space. What were her memories of that when you interviewed her for American Scary?
Okay. Well, first of all, this whole Plan 9 from Outer Space is the worst movie ever made crap.
Yeah.
I just don't buy the worst movie ever made. You can get past the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
The fact that people can obsessively go through that movie again and again and again, people can argue quite rightly about every technical blunder in that film. But when we spoke about it, I referred to the film as being magically weird, and she just laughed. She said, "Yeah, magically weird." She said, "Yeah, that was it." And I think her attitude about that film and about Ed Wood changed over time. When she was still seriously trying to eke out some sort of career to try to get back into film or something, she was very, very dismissive of Ed Wood and the film and just embarrassed about it.
Really?
But as time went on, she really developed kind of a fondness for it. And in fact, when we spoke with her, she told her old story about the fact that her character originally had lines in the script, but they were so dreadful that she said, "Look, let me just play this silently." And they said, "Okay, sure, no problem."
Yeah.
But
less to worry about too.
Yeah. But she went on to say, I wish I'd kept that dialogue was so wonderful. I wish I had kept it.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, I can only imagine the lines that she had.
Yeah.
Now, did she talk about Lugosi at all? Did she?
No, not really. Lugosi wasn't involved in the film by the time
she
Maila
came on.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
he was. Yeah, he had died a long time prior to the production of the film. Ed had just shot some footage unrelated to anything, just Bela walking around a cemetery with a cape and walking out of his house. But it was never attached to a project until this idea for Plan 9 came up. So they were never. Oh, although I'm sorry, I don't mean to imply that Maila never met Bela Lugosi.
Oh yeah, no.
She did work with him in a Broadway a Las Vegas show.
And how did that go?
I think she really enjoyed it. She had very fond memories of Bela as a person, and really enjoyed the time that she did get to spend with him. Yeah, she was very fond of him.
How was she? Because you interviewed her in 2006, was it? Or
let me see. No, it was actually earlier than 2004.
Okay.
It was the 50th anniversary of Vampira was coming up.
So how was she when she talked about the entertainment business? I mean, did she still hold a fondness for it at that stage, or was she sort of not really?
Yeah, she was reminded us a few times during the course of the interview. Said, "I'm an old lady now. I just do old lady stuff." She doesn't really pay attention to the passing parade at that point anymore. She basically she had a handful of friends that she hung out with, mostly as she put it, people in the punk music scene stuff. She said, "Oh yeah, those are the people I still hang out with when I do." So she still, she still appreciated the edge, but beyond that, she said, "Yeah, I just, I walk down to my favorite little donut shop. I hang around the house. That's pretty much what I do." So she didn't really have any opinions about modern stuff at all.
What about horror hosts? I mean, did she ever...
She didn't really. She, in fact, she was never really a horror film fan herself. With a little bit of prompting, she did have fond things to say about some of the Universal films. Just how nicely they were put together.
Sure.
But her interest was really in the visual arts, in painting and things like that. And we ended up talking. I think we ended up talking more about like Camus and Erte than we did Karloff and Lugosi in the course of our conversation. I mean, those were her interests really lay.
Is that what she did after she stopped doing Vampira and not doing
movies?
She
did do beyond, aside from Plan 9 from Outer Space, she did do a few small roles. She was in a couple of Albert Zugsmith films, the Beatniks and Sex Kittens Go to College, and then she was more famously in The Magic Sword, the Bert I. Gordon film, in which she had two roles. She played the seer, basically, at the beginning, this beautiful woman in a pond that warns the princess of peril, and then later plays the hag character in the film, with a really twisted, grotesque gargoyle makeup, but her own long fingernails.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much what she did, and then she said beyond that, she showed up in a few documentaries like American Scary. There was another entire film dedicated to her called Vampira, Sex, Death, and Taxes, which I really liked a lot, because it really took the trouble to frame her as an artist and a bohemian, and that really says so much more about her character than someone who just takes the sort of surface Plan 9 and kind of angle with her. But yeah, so she showed up in a few of those, and a few documentaries and a few short films, but for the most part, hadn't done much more in terms of films. She did paint a lot. She ran her own antique shop in Los Angeles for a while.
Certainly,
she talked about doing some sort of art, mixing paint and other organic materials like dog hair and stuff, which really kind of reminded me of things that David Lynch was doing.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, that's really much more her perspective on things.
So here we are. We're coming up to the Vampira tribute at the end of the month, March 26th through the 28th in Indianapolis. You will be there, as well as 80 other horror hosts. What does this weekend mean for you?
Man, is that amazing or what?
I know.
I remember when I first, you had Jason Hicknett on your program earlier. When we first started talking about this, he was sort of throwing out ideas and figuring maybe, you get 12 different hosts tops, and he would be really thrilled with that. But at some point, with the change of venue to the Horror Hound weekend, this thing suddenly snowballed in a very, very major way. And, went from 24 to 80 confirmed hosts. And also some pretty big names like Joe Bob Briggs and Elvira and Rachel Grant, who I know Jason also did mention. She was a Bond girl as well as a horror host in the UK.
Yes.
And people like that. And I think with the passage of time, the generations today really know more about Maila Nurmi, Vampira, than anyone outside of that tight little Los Angeles market did, from the 50s. Again, her legacy has been a scattering of photographs and Plan 9, and until she started to appear in these other documentaries. I forgot to mention The Haunted World of Edward D. Wood, where she comes off extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
And so people have really, really come to understand her and to really accept her as, the birth mother of this whole genre.
Yeah.
And really appreciate that. So these people are coming into this with that sort of awareness. And to me, I look at this and, I once in a lifetime is the banner I put on something like that. I've never seen anything quite like it.
Now you're going to be bringing something pretty special to the event as well, right?
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of items. I'm bringing one of Maila's dresses, not a Vampira dress, but one of the dresses that she owned in the early '60s that she had donated to an auction for Actors Insurance. I can't remember what the name of the thing is right now, but so that was great. That was a wonderful find.
Uh-huh.
And then also I'm bringing some footage from the interview that we did for her for American Scary. We sat down with her for about an hour and a half for this interview, and maybe 4 minutes tops shows up in the film. So there's a lot more to go into. And so I'm just taking, I've got a start point and an end point, and I just pulled the raw footage for that, and it just gives such a nice feeling of what we experienced that day. Because not only do we have the Q&A, but people are, telling stories and drinking coffee and all, all those off-camera things.
Yeah.
And it really sort of just captures the quality of the afternoon in such a special way.
Great. You're also going to be a part of the 100 Years of Horror Movies. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah. Ms. Monster, one of our folks up here in San Francisco, sort of helped pull me back out of retirement to host The Last Man on Earth with her
great.
At one of the shows. Yeah.
Oh, that's such a great movie. I love that movie.
It's scheduled on just before Night of the Living Dead. So
great.
We are just delighted.
That movie. I mean, out of the 3 attempts of adapting I Am Legend.
It's at the very least it tries to cleave to the book. You know?
It really does. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Richard Matheson even wrote the screenplay for that.
He did initially, but there were a lot of rewrites, and Matheson's not happy with the film, and with very, very good reason. But the fact that so many of the elements of his book are still in there is really something.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to nitpick in that film, but the overall quality of it I really do like.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I'm glad you and Miss Monster will be doing the wraps for that. That sounds fantastic. And I know that the website isn't up yet for it. So if anybody wants to check out the 100 Years of Horror Movies, they just need to go to thehorrorhoundweekend.com to find the link, and then you can go onto that, and then you'll see all the movies with all the horror hosts.
Right. This
is
just one. Yeah, this is just one film in, I think, 32.
I think is something like that.
Yeah, that they're showing over the course of the entire weekend,
and
some of those will be hosted live. Some will be hosted with pre-record. It'll be a real mix, but just a great lineup of films. Some really fun stuff.
Well, I can't wait, and I know everybody out there can't wait, and those that are going got to be extremely excited. Michael, thank you so much for coming back to give us just a little glimpse at the woman, Maila Nurmi, Vampira. And if anybody wants to follow you online, where can they go?
Yeah, I'm not really set up for anything just now. I throw out emails when people ask me a question, and that's about it. But yeah, I don't have a website. I'm not into the whole MySpace, MyFace, whatever.
Neither am I.
none of that stuff.
Well,
but
yeah,
but I do have some projects coming up. I'm doing some writing, and I'm also in discussions to turn this Vampira interview footage into another type of documentary, memorial type of thing. So
right.
There's some projects coming up, and once something's solidified, I'm sure a website will come up about either that or the book.
Great. Well, listen, it was great having you back on the show. Thank you for being here. Have a great time at Vampira Tribute, and can't wait to have you back on again.
Hey, well, thank you very much. It's always fun.
And as I put this interview to rest, I want to again thank Michael Monahan for joining me on the show. There is one correction that he did want me to make for him. He mentioned that Maila was in a film called The Beatniks. The name of the film was actually called The Beat Generation. So just want to make that correction. Michael caught that, and just wanted to do that here as a little bit of a postscript to the interview. And it's always great to have Michael on the show. He's such a great guy, such a fountain of information. Just amazing. And again, I want to thank him for coming back on the show, and I look forward to having him on again in the near future. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the interview with Michael and all that great information on Vampira. Certainly one of the important figures in horror. I think most, if not all, would agree on that. All right, well, these next couple of shows, I'm going to continue talking about horror hosts, and we've been talking about them. Now you're going to be hearing from them. So starting next show, I'm going to have one of the all-time great horror hosts on here, a true honor. The name of the horror host is, you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait. But I think the wait will be worth it. I know the wait will be worth it. So stay tuned for the next upload. I'm a dick. Stay tuned for the next upload, and you'll find out who that horror host is. But it is one of the classic horror hosts, and it was my honor to have him on the show. A little hint there. If you would like to leave comments on the appropriate sites, please do. I always look forward to hearing from you. And you can always reach me at gyspodcast@gmail.com. gyspodcast@gmail.com. That's G as in grave, Y as in yard, S as in show. gyspodcast@gmail.com. And you can also find the show on YouTube, iTunes, Anchor, Podomatic, Google, just everywhere. If it carries a podcast, you should be able to find the Graveyard Show podcast there. All righty, my friends, that's going to do it for me as we head back outside into my windy yet cooling graveyard in this horrible, horrible summer heat. It's always great having you visit again, and if you know of any horror fans, please send them this way. New visitors are always welcomed. All right, my friends, as you exit the graveyard, I would like to remind you to please lock the gate behind you. We wouldn't want anyone to get out. Until next time.